So we found this quote in Science and Sanity, which I thought was really kind of the heart of our discussions about mindfulness and general semantics. Why should we have to use such unfamiliar and therefore seemingly difficult methods to achieve such obvious results?
So both practices came out of a desire to do something about human suffering. For Korzybski, it was his experiences of the horror and terror of World War I. For John Kabat-Zinn, who was a major developer of mindfulness, MBSR, it's early in the morning, mindfulness stress reduction. It was originally to do something for people with chronic illness for which medicine had no answer. But the idea in both cases was to relieve human suffering.
So I'd like to invite you for a moment to change your hat from listening to us and perhaps listening to yourself. So maybe putting down your papers, uncrossing your legs, knowing that 4 floors under us, there's ground. And just take a moment to drop into your breath. If you want to close your eyes, that's fine, or you can just gaze out softly in front of you. And just take a moment to check in with yourself. What is my experience in this moment? Where are my thoughts, my emotions? What sensations am I most aware of in my body? And even if it's unpleasant, just acknowledge and register the experience. Then gently redirect your attention to your breath, to each in-breath, to each out-breath, as they follow one after another. You don't have to control the breath. Your body knows how to breathe. Just this breath, just this moment. And then if you'd like, gently expanding your field of awareness around your breathing to include your body, your posture, your facial expression. Expanding your awareness to the sense of being in this room, in this moment. And then gently, if you'd like, bringing your attention back into your breath and taking a deep breath in and sighing it away. And when you're ready, coming back into the room. Anybody notice anything shift?
Every time.
Huh?
Yes.
So, huh? I'm sorry?
Can you expand?
I mean, yeah, there's a sense of like calm that happens when you do this type of stuff. For me.
Yeah. So it doesn't, people don't always feel calm. Certainly, I've worked with people who become aware of how anxious they are when they do this, which as a therapist to me is not necessarily a bad thing. But just that checking into our breath briefly down-regulates the automatic nervous system and lets us access our own internal experiences in a way that we very often are not paying much attention to. John Kabat-Zinn defined mindfulness as the awareness that emerges through paying attention on purpose, without judgment, without being attached to the outcome, to things as they are in the present moment. And he'll often add, as if your life depended upon it. And mindfulness means we're bringing bare attention to our present moment experience without getting caught up in the content. Mindful moments are intentional. We're purposefully directing our attention. They're present-centered in the experience of the moment, not thinking about it. We work towards developing an awareness before words arise in the mind. We don't get caught up in thinking. We may choose to explore subtle levels of perception in a way we don't when we're not paying attention. And whatever the experience is, we accept as it is in the moment.
So as you can see from the slide, we're really talking about similar approaches to experience. Even though the underlying philosophies are quite different. And we'll come to that at the very end, which I think is very exciting. In general semantics, we talk about at least 3 levels. The event or process level, the object or what is known to us without words, and then finally the descriptive level or naming or labeling what we're experiencing. And then we can also go to higher levels of abstraction beyond that.
In mindfulness training, we work a lot with the triangle of awareness, which is sensation, thought, and emotion. And each of these has its own 3 levels: noticing and experiencing, naming and labeling, and investigating. You'll notice they're all present participle words. We try to use present participle because that brings you more into the immediacy of the present moment. And the process of being aware of something, naming it, and then choosing to investigate it is part of the practice of choiceless awareness.
In general semantics, we use the premises of the map is not the territory, it's not all the territory, and the map is self-reflexive. And we use indexing and dating as a way to mark that things are always changing.
In mindfulness, we talk about beginner's mind, one of the core principles of MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction. The idea is that each moment is experienced as fresh and new. It was never before experienced. So even if you've knit 35 stitches, the 36th stitch is different because your experience has grown by a stitch. So every moment is unique.
We also, in general semantics, talk about silence on the unspeakable level, and this was a source of great problems between the two of us trying to interpret what we were saying until we noticed the hyphen between the unspeakable because Sandy's semantic reaction to the word unspeakable was something negative, whereas once we put the hyphen in, oh, that made a difference.
I would usually tend to interpret it as, I would say, well, if you're being silent on the silent level. So in mindfulness practice, choiceless awareness, which is also referred to as open presence, is sitting with bare awareness, bare attention of whatever comes up without pursuing. And what people begin to notice is that there's an ebb and flow. If you have an itch and you don't scratch it, you will notice that that itch changes in intensity and moves. And so sitting with that itch and not scratching and just sort of watching it without attaching to it as, you know, and noticing the labels that come up. Oh my God, I can't stand this, I have to scratch. Mickey's talked about how I can't stand this is a very interesting set of words because people say it and they're standing with whatever it is that's bothering them all the time. So mindfulness gives the choiceless awareness. You can either just watch and let go. If you decide you're going to scratch that itch, you move, following the movement of your hand going to scratch. And the fact that your hand knows just where to go and being attentive to all those minute second by microsecond parts of that process.
And if you allowed yourself to participate in the mindfulness exercise that we did just a little while ago, you could experience that either as silence on the unspeakable level or
Choiceless awareness.
choices awareness.
Most people come to MBSR in the U.S. now through the mindfulness-based stress reduction programs and all the things that have come about because of the popularity of the program. The MBSR programs are typically 8 weeks of 2.5-hour classes with a day-long silent retreat. And people get very anxious at the idea that they're going to have to spend a day from like 9 to 3 o'clock hardly talking. And when you tell them that you're doing a 7-day silent retreat, you know, my friends say, oh my God, how can you even think of that? The research in MBSR programs, which is voluminous, shows that participants experience improved stress resilience, enhanced well-being, greater equanimity, and better management of chronic disorders, physical and emotional. If we have some time, I can talk about some of that at the end. Okay. Classes also include training in compassion for self and others. Mindfulness sharpens the ability to tend to new information. We talked about stress resiliency. Appears to increase compassion and make compassion more effective. People are more willing to act on things that they see. It seems to reduce some types of bias and negative thinking, and has some effects on physical health, including immune function.
And if you've been practicing general semantics practice, you can get very much the same results.
We know that the thing that I think is exciting to Mickey and I is that the advent of all the imaging studies that we can now do on the brain kind of document what happens when you're practicing. So that there's a lot of work that shows meditation dampens the activity of the amygdala, which is the alerting system in the brain, and that there's great functional connectivity between the prefrontal cortex that manages emotion and executive functioning and stress responses. So
Cortical thalamo integration in general semantics terms.
And, you know, Krasipsky brought the idea of time binding into our thinking. What we're finding in some of the studying, the research that's going on, looking at neuroplasticity and epigenetics, talks about the way that we can alter neural pathways, and that those alterations can be embedded in the DNA and transferred on to the next generation, which is really important when you're talking about trauma, and that people may, in fact, you know, be passing trauma genetically through epigenetics. So it's really exciting research. So what we kind of came to as we were putting this together was that we both have somewhat of an orientation in general systems theory, which is what family therapy started out in which levels of systems, each of which is a whole, are in constant interaction with another. And there's this concept of equifinality, where from divergent paths, similar conclusions can be reached, and that change is a constant part of all experience. Now, Krasipsky was writing in the 30s, general systems theory came up in the 30s.
Sullivan's work in psychiatry, which is very much oriented to Einstein and his general relativity. Also, he was doing that at the same time. There was a kind of a gestalt that was happening.
And Zen apparently was making its way into Western knowledge at about the same time. So it's really fascinating that, you know, East does in fact meet West. It goes in both directions, and all of this was happening at about the same time.
And I'll just conclude with something that Krasipsky talked about a lot. When you can, when something is invariant, no matter what form of system that you're talking about, it's significant. And what he said is the fact that, and for us it meant that the fact that two different forms of representation come to the same place shows that, in Krasipsky's words, we are dealing with something genuinely important, independent of the structure of the language that we use. And that's why we got so excited about presenting this to you all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Um,